NNEKA'S hair salon sat at the edge of a busy market in Enugu, where traders called out to customers and the sounds of bargaining filled the air. The salon, though small, was always full of life. Bright posters of women with sleek braids and dazzling weaves decorated the walls, inviting anyone passing by to step inside. The scent of hair creams and shampoos greeted customers at the door, along with the steady buzz of conversation among women waiting to have their hair styled. Inside, NNEKA worked tirelessly. She was known far and wide for her exceptional skill with hair. Her fingers moved with the grace of a dancer, weaving and twisting strands into intricate styles that left her clients in awe. Whether it was thick, curly hair or soft, straight hair, NNEKA knew just what to do. Her clients always left with smiles on their faces, amazed by the magic her hands performed. Young girls, mothers, and even grandmothers trusted NNEKA with their hair, knowing she would transform them into something beautiful. But NNEKA's talent wasn't the only reason her salon was so successful. There was a secret behind her success, one that no one in Enugu knew. As NNEKA brushed and styled her clients' hair, she always collected the loose strands that fell to the ground. With a quick, unnoticed motion, she would sweep the fallen hair into a small bag she kept hidden behind her chair. No one ever questioned it. After all, what harm could come from a few strands of hair? Each night, after her last customer left and the shop was locked, NNEKA would carefully gather all the hair she had collected throughout the day. To her clients, the hair was nothing more than shed strands from a long day styling, but to NNEKA, it was something much more valuable. Years ago, an old herbalist from a neighboring village had taught her the secret of the hair's power. She would take the hair home, where she lived in a small hut just outside the town. Once inside, she would place the hair into a pot of water and add a special mixture of herbs the herbalist had given her. These weren't just any herbs, these were plants known for their mystical properties, said to hold the power to bind and control spirits. As the pot boiled, NNEKA would sit by the fire, watching the steam rise and inhaling its strange, sweet scent. The herbalist had told her that boiling the hair and inhaling the steam would make her stronger, not in body, but in spirit. It would give her control over the people whose hair she collected, drawing them back to her salon time and again, unable to resist her touch. The more hair she collected, the stronger her power grew. NNEKA had been skeptical at first, but after trying the ritual just once, she noticed a change. Clients who had only come in once or twice before suddenly became regulars, praising her skill and telling all their friends about her. As NNEKA's reputation spread throughout the town and even to the neighboring villages, more and more women came to her salon. They would sit for hours, waiting their turn, eager to feel NNEKA's magical touch. Some came for special occasions, like weddings and birthdays, while others simply wanted to look their best. But what they didn't know was that every time they left a strand of hair behind, they were leaving a piece of themselves with NNEKA. The ritual became a part of NNEKA's daily life. She performed it every night without fail, sometimes even twice if the day had been especially busy. Her power grew with each passing day, and with it, her business flourished. Other hairdressers in the town began to notice how successful she had become, but no one could figure out the secret to her success. They thought it was her skill alone that brought in so many clients, but NNEKA knew better. Despite the growing crowds at her salon, NNEKA remained humble. She treated each client with care and respect, never letting on that there was anything unusual about her methods. To the women of Enugu, she was simply the best hairstylist around, someone whose hands could work wonders. But deep down, NNEKA knew that the power of the hair, the magic she had learned, was the true reason for her success. And as long as no one found out, her secret would remain safe. One evening, as Nneka was finishing up her ritual, she remembered the warning the herbalist had given her many years ago. "Be careful with this power," the old woman had said. "It can give you great success, but if misused, it will turn against you." At the time, Nneka hadn't paid much attention to the warning. After all, she wasn't hurting anyone. She was simply using the hair her clients left behind. How could that be considered misuse? But as she stirred the pot of boiling hair and herbs that night, the words echoed in her mind. She shook off the feeling of unease, reminding herself of how far she had come. Her salon was thriving, and the women of Enugu adored her. Surely there was no harm in continuing the ritual. She closed her eyes and inhaled the fragrant steam, feeling the familiar surge of energy course through her body. The power was intoxicating, and Nneka wasn't ready to give it up. As she finished her ritual, she heard a knock at the door. Startled, she glanced at the clock. It was late, far too late for visitors. Slowly, she approached the door and peered through the small window. To her surprise, it was the herbalist, now older and more frail than Nneka remembered. The old woman's face was serious, her eyes dark and unreadable. "Nneka," the herbalist called softly. "I warned you. The time has come for you to be careful. The spirits are watching." Nneka opened the door, unsure of what to say. The herbalist's words filled her with an uneasiness she couldn't shake, but she nodded respectfully and thanked the old woman for her advice. Once the herbalist had left, Nneka stood in the doorway, staring into the night. A chill crept up her spine. Could it be true? Was there something more to the power she had harnessed than she understood? The following morning, Nneka pushed the herbalist's warning to the back of her mind and prepared for another busy day at the salon. As usual, a line of customers was waiting for her when she opened the door. Among them was Amaka, a new client from a nearby village. She was a tall woman with long, thick hair that cascaded down her back in soft waves. She had heard of Nneka's reputation and wanted to see for herself what all the fuss was about. As Amaka sat in Nneka's chair, she couldn't help but notice the way Nneka seemed to move around the salon. Her fingers were quick and precise, but there was something about the way she collected the stray hairs that struck Amaka as odd. Whenever a strand fell to the floor, Nneka would sweep it up almost immediately, her eyes darting around as if she didn't want anyone to notice. Amaka grew curious. She had heard stories of people using hair in strange rituals, and she wondered if there was more to Nneka's success than just her skill. As Nneka finished braiding Amaka's hair, Amaka made a decision. She would take her hair home with her, just in case. After all, it couldn't hurt to be careful. When Nneka finished, Amaka stood up and began to gather the small strands of hair that had fallen to the floor. Nneka's heart skipped a beat. "Oh, Amaka, don't worry about that," Nneka said, trying to sound calm. "I'll sweep it up for you." But Amaka smiled and shook her head. "No, it's fine. I've heard it's bad luck to leave your hair behind. I'll take it with me." Nneka's stomach twisted with fear. She watched helplessly as Amaka collected her hair and tucked it into her bag. For the first time since she had started her ritual, Nneka felt the cold grip of panic. What would happen if someone took their hair? Would the magic be broken? That night, Nneka's hands trembled as she performed her ritual. She boiled the remaining hair she had collected that day, but something felt different. The air in her small hut was heavy, and the steam from the pot seemed to linger in the air, thicker than usual. Nneka inhaled deeply, but instead of the familiar feeling of power, a strange sensation filled her chest. It was as if the steam was suffocating her, pressing down on her lungs and making it hard to breathe. She tried to shake off the feeling, but it wouldn't go away. The herbalist's warning echoed in her mind. The spirits are watching. Nneka's heart raced as she realized what was happening. The ritual was no longer working the way it had before. Something had shifted, and Nneka had no idea how to stop it. The next morning, as she opened her salon, Nneka noticed a sharp pain in her hands. At first, it was just a dull ache, but by midday, her fingers were swollen and stiff. She struggled to braid her client's hair, her once graceful fingers now clumsy and slow. The women in her salon began to whisper, noticing the change in Nneka's skill. By the end of the day, Nneka could barely hold a comb. She collapsed into a chair, her hands throbbing with pain. The swelling had grown worse, and her fingers were now unrecognizable. Panic surged through her as she realized the truth: the ritual had turned against her. The power she had once controlled was slipping away, and the consequences of her actions were beginning to unfold. As Nneka's hands continued to swell, she felt a deep sense of dread wash over her. She had never experienced anything like this before, and the pain was unbearable. Her once strong fingers were now stiff, swollen, and completely useless. With no other choice, she decided to call the herbalist. Surely, the old woman would know how to reverse whatever was happening. She picked up her phone with trembling hands, her heart racing as she dialed the familiar number. The phone rang and rang, but there was no answer. Nneka tried again, but still, there was only silence. Panic began to settle in as she realized the herbalist might not help her this time. What if she had made a mistake too big to fix? Nneka's mind raced, replaying every detail of the last few days. Could Amaka taking her hair have triggered this? She had followed the ritual for years, and nothing like this had ever happened before. But the thought of Amaka collecting her hair made her stomach churn with fear. She had underestimated the power of the spirits, and now, they were turning on her. Determined not to give up, Nneka grabbed her keys and headed to the herbalist's house. She had to find answers, no matter what. Nneka's journey to the herbalist's house felt longer than usual. The narrow dirt roads twisted through the village, and every bump in the road made her hands throb with pain. By the time she arrived at the small, run-down house, her heart was pounding in her chest. She hurried to the door, knocking loudly. The door creaked open, and Nneka was met with the sight of the herbalist sitting in her usual spot, surrounded by bundles of dried herbs and old books. The herbalist looked up slowly, her tired eyes meeting Nneka's. "Nneka," she said in a low, gravelly voice. "You have come." "Yes, Baba," Nneka replied, her voice trembling. "Something terrible has happened. My hands, look at them." The herbalist's eyes narrowed as she examined Nneka's swollen hands. She shook her head slowly, her face grim. "I warned you, Nneka. You played with forces you don't fully understand." Nneka's heart sank. "But you taught me the ritual. You told me it would bring success. Why is this happening now?" The herbalist sighed deeply, her gaze shifting to the floor. "The power was never yours to control, Nneka. The spirits allow us to borrow their strength, but if you misuse it or become greedy, they will take it back. And the consequences will be severe." Nneka's breath caught in her throat. "Please, Baba, there must be something we can do." I can't lose everything. I've worked so hard. The herbalist looked at her sadly. There is no remedy for this, Nneka. Once the spirits have decided, they cannot be swayed. You must accept your fate. Nneka's words seemed to crumble around her. The weight of the herbalist's words pressed down on her chest, suffocating her with fear. She had thought she could control the power, but now, it was slipping away, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The days that followed were filled with torment for Nneka. Her hands continued to swell, becoming so large and deformed that she could no longer walk. Her once thriving salon stood empty, as her clients began to drift away. Word had spread that Nneka's skill was failing, and soon, the salon that had once been filled with laughter and chatter was eerily quiet. Nneka tried to hide her condition, but the pain was unbearable. Every time she looked at her hands, she was reminded of the power she had lost. The swelling had grown so severe that she could no longer hold a comb, let alone style hair. The transformation that had once brought beauty to so many women was now out of her reach. Her clients, once eager to sit in her chair, no longer came to visit. Even the women who had praised her skill and called her the best in the village avoided her. Nneka's name, once spoken with admiration, was now whispered with fear and suspicion. The women who had flocked to her salon began to wonder what had caused her sudden downfall, and rumors of dark magic began to circulate through the village. Nneka spent her days alone in the salon, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The woman who had once been so confident and successful was now a shadow of her former self. Her hands, the very tools that had brought her success, were now a source of endless pain and shame. As weeks passed, Nneka's condition worsened. The swelling in her hands had spread to her arms, and her once strong body was now weak and frail. Every night, she lay in bed, tormented by the sound of whispers in the darkness. The spirits she had called upon for power were now haunting her, their voices filled with anger and disappointment. One night, as Nneka lay in bed, she felt a strange sensation beneath her skin. At first, it was a faint tingling, but soon it turned into a sharp, burning pain. She gasped in horror as tiny maggots began to crawl out from beneath her skin. They wriggled and squirmed, eating away at her flesh as she screamed in terror. She rushed to the hospital, but the doctors were baffled. No one could explain what was happening to her, and no treatment seemed to work. Nneka was forced to return home, her body deteriorating with each passing day. The maggots continued to eat away at her skin, and the pain became unbearable. By now, the villagers had heard of Nneka's fate. They whispered about the strange woman who had once been so successful, only to fall from grace. Some said it was a curse, others said it was the spirit's revenge. But one thing was certain, Nneka's time was running out. Nneka's world grew darker with each passing day. The pain was relentless, and the maggots devoured her flesh at a terrifying rate. She no longer recognized the person she saw in the mirror. Her once beautiful hands were now grotesque, swollen, and riddled with decay. The salon that had once been the source of her pride was now her prison. She stayed inside most days, too ashamed to show her face to the villagers. The rumors about her condition had spread quickly, and even her closest friends were too afraid to visit. They whispered behind her back, speculating about the dark forces she had angered. Some said she had made a deal with the spirits, others believed she had practiced forbidden magic. But none of them dared come near her. Nneka tried to reach out for help, but every attempt was met with silence. Even her family, who had once been proud of her success, had distanced themselves. No one wanted to be associated with the cursed woman whose hands had brought her downfall. She was alone, left to suffer the consequences of her actions.